Last month, my fiancée Faye and I went to her parents' cabin up in Pikes Peak, Colorado, and had a set of extremely weird and terrifying experiences. We found an old dream catcher on a tree in the woods out back, and at night we heard a series of unsettling voices coming out from the forest. At first we thought someone was messing with us, but then the voices began to take on recognizable traits. We heard Faye's grandfather calling out for help. He's been dead since 2012. And my mother laughing. She lives 700 miles away. Faye got sick and began talking in her sleep, and at one point, the voice of a woman outside began to repeat some of the things Faye was mumbling, as though they were communicating. I documented the entire experience here on No Sleep, and received overwhelming support from fellow Redditors. Thousands of people have gotten involved with helping us out. Everything has been going really great up until a few days ago. I'm sorry I haven't posted about this matter in a while, but Faye and I have been trying to forget it, especially with her weird sleep disorder. The best course of action for us was to try to bury what had happened and move on with our lives. The more upset or stressed out she becomes, the more she sleepwalks and sleep talks. And that is when scary things happen. For those of you who haven't read the prior stories, my fiancée has suffered from an extensive sleep disturbance since she was 5. She has night terrors and is an accomplished sleepwalker. At the request of Redditors, I interviewed her so you can hear all about her weird experiences. Long story short, some sort of entity became fixated upon her while we were up in the cabin in Colorado and made several attempts to coax her into the woods. When those attempts failed, it came after me. It followed us home to California and tried to get into our house at night by communicating with Faye while she sleepwalked. We were both exposed to whatever it was, to the point that it made us ill. A family friend, Nathan, essentially forced us to puke our guts out in a spiritual purging process, although I wish he told us first because we destroyed our living room carpet. We thought it was over. Faye went back to normal and returned to her playful, funny self. She got all of her strength back, and not just physically, but the strength of her personality returned as well. She's been feisty and won't put up with any of my bullshit, which was a great sign that she was feeling better. And she's been wearing her engagement ring. It hasn't left her finger since we got it back. But 2 nights ago, weird things started to happen. I absolutely dread writing this because I know that paying attention to it, I risk exasperating the situation. The part of the carpet where we'd lost our lunch is permanently stained and rather dark because I couldn't afford to get a decent carpet cleaner out in time. When we were watching or crying through the new Games of Thrones on Sunday, Faye pointed out that the stain looked like the shape of a man. It's about 3 feet long and basically looks like some type of 2-dimensional troll. We made some retract jokes about it, then we went to bed. I rolled over in the middle of the night to put my hand on Faye's back, and the second I touched that empty space on the bed, 1,000 horrible thoughts rushed through my head. Faye hasn't sleepwalked since things settled down, and I feared this was an omen that our visitor had returned. I found her downstairs. She was sitting in the dark, spine straight, right in front of the TV. It was off. Her eyes were closed, but she was running her fingers across the stain on the carpet, whispering to it, and giggling. I raced over and threw on the lights, forgoing my role of never waking her up abruptly from a bout of sleepwalking. I just didn't want this to be happening again. I couldn't accept it. Just before I shook her awake, she said, "How could I forget?" She came to and had no idea where she was. She seemed unusually upset that I had woken her up, as if she were in the middle of a very good dream. but then appeared frightened when I told her what was happening. I asked if she remembered anything, but she said no. I can't tell if she lied to me. On her way up the stairs, she inexplicably vomited all over the wall. It was the same dark brown, black color as when Nathan poisoned us. At this point, I was completely freaking out. I tried to keep my cool and helped Faye into bed, got her some water, and made sure she was alright. She was absolutely fine and couldn't explain why she puked. Then I turned off the light and closed the bedroom door and spent about half an hour trying to clean the goddamn wall. I've mentioned in my previous post that I'm an emotophobic, so cleaning vomit is basically the worst form of punishment I can imagine. But something distracted me from the horrid stench. No matter how hard I scrubbed, the stain would not come out, and it had splattered roughly in the shape of a man. Because of the fact that Faye was standing halfway up the stairs and barfed down the wall, this time the stain was much longer than the one on the carpet, almost 5 feet tall. When I finally got into bed, Faye was awake and was kind enough to give me a really nice shoulder rub as I laid there in a heap. I was nauseated and terrified. She tried to reassure me, but we both knew what was happening. Whatever it is that's fascinated with her, it's back. Or maybe it never left. I don't know how long we sat there talking, but eventually I passed out, Faye lying in my arms. She said a few more things in her sleep, but I could never quite catch them. I was just too tired. The next day I tried to reach out to Nathan, but he wasn't answering his phone. I had to work, so I didn't see Faye all day, and I got home before she did. So I spent several hours jumping at every sound outside while grading my students' final papers. When she did get home, she said she felt sick all day and just wanted to go to sleep. So she went upstairs and showered, then got into bed. Around 10:30 p.m., I shut off my laptop and headed upstairs. Faye was sitting on the bed, feet on the ground, staring at the open window into the woods across the street. I gently laid her down, rubbed her back until she snored. That's the only way to guarantee she won't get up for a long time. And inspected the whole house. I don't know if I'm just freaking myself out or if I'm tired, but the vomit stain, it seems bigger. I'm calling a guy tomorrow to do a professional cleaning, but I'm pissed because I know I'm going to get stuck with a $200 bill for the job. I checked the backyard and didn't see anything, then made sure that the front door was locked and all the windows were sealed tight. The last window I checked was the one in the guest bedroom, the one on which Faye had drawn the number 5 backwards while sleepwalking. I stood there for a long time. It was late and dark, and all the memories of last month's events just kept cycling through my mind over and over again. I felt dizzy and sleepy, almost hypnotized. It was a strange feeling, an ineffable mixture of strange relation and terror. I cannot explain to you why I did this, but without even thinking about it, I reached out my hand and lazily drew a backwards 5 on the window. And in that tiny moment, I saw something move behind the trees across the street. Faye abruptly burst into sleep laughter from down the hall. As I walked back to the bedroom in the dark, I could hear her giggling the entire way. Nothing else to report for now. It's 10:31 p.m. Tuesday as I write this. Now I'm gonna go to sleep. We'll update if there's any new developments, and I pray there aren't any. A lot of Redditors have mentioned that since I retrieved Faye's ring from the creepy dream catcher, it's possible that it's been cursed. After all, the ring was given back to me. It could be what is causing the new disturbances around my house. So, Faye and I decided to take the long trek back to Pikes Peak, from whence the evil ring came, and destroyed it by throwing it into the mine at the top of the mountain. We gathered a fellowship of 7 other people to help us on this journey. Just kidding. But seriously, a lot of people have speculated that the ring is now the problem. I'm taking this into consideration. But Faye is not willing to part with it right now, seeing how she just got it back. But if the entity seeking Faye did curse the ring and got me to break the dream catcher to retrieve it, it is even more clever than I could have anticipated. More on this if I decide to make a move. We had a professional carpet cleaner service some out yesterday and tried to tackle the puke stain situation. The guy told me over and over that's not vomit. I can get vomit out. It took him a long time, but he finally managed to get most of the stain off the carpet in the living room and recommended we get checked out at the hospital. I told him we already had. Some parts of the carpet are still spotted and ruined. He gave me a discount. The wall in the stairwell is another story. The guy took one look at it and said we needed to paint it, but I insisted the stain had to be removed before doing so. He told me to strip and sand the wall, or he could come back and do it on his day off for a small fee. I told him I'd take care of it. He made an exorcism joke and left. I wasn't amused. Faye came home very excited yesterday. She got a promotion at her job. We celebrated by going out to dinner at our favorite steakhouse. She ordered her normal meal, thank God, and had a few drinks. I don't drink at all, so I was the DD for the evening. When we got home, we pretty much went right to bed. And on the way up the stairs, she drunkenly said, "Fuck that guy," and pointed a lazy hand at the stain on the wall. That night, I had a very strange dream. I dreamt I was trying to scrub the stain off the wall, just like I had a few days ago. But this time I was scrubbing in the dark. Moonlight was just barely seeping through the window and illuminating the outline of the stain, which looked more like a man than ever before. It loomed over me as I crouched there on the stairs. But then, something weird happened. The wall underneath the stain turned mushy, like oatmeal, and gave way to my hand. My arm went right through the drywall. When I pulled it out, there was a faint light coming through the hole. I pushed more and more of the squishy wall away. It crumbled and plopped onto the floor on the other side. At last, I cleared a hole big enough to squeeze through. It led into a familiar place. I realized that was where I was the second I stepped in. It was freezing cold, even in the dream. I was in the cellar of the cabin, where I'd found all of the jars and that hair, where I'd found the pieces needed to make more dream catchers. I felt instantly afraid and turned around to go back into my house, but the wall was sealed shut. The only way out of the cellar was through the panels at the top of the wooden staircase, leading to the outside. Snow was falling down onto the stairs. I remember seeing something on the ground behind one of the shovels. I picked it up and instantly recognized its importance. It made me feel like I understood everything better. But before I could see what it was, I was woken up by Faye. She was still in bed. She was sitting up against the pillows, running her fingers around my neck and back. She was looking down at me, smiling, but her hair was dangling in such a way that obscured her face a little, and the moon lit her up from the window behind her, so she looked different. I recognized my fiancé's hair and body, but her face looked old and weathered, like an old man's. At that point, I noticed her hand felt different too. It was rough and heavy, like a guy's. It took me a second to realize that she was probably sleeping, so I sat up and just watched her. After a few moments of this, she absurdly got out of bed and walked to the door, mumbling to herself about that sound again. I followed her quietly, wondering what she'd do. She walked through the wall, never searching for the light switched, and stood at the top of the stairs. She started whispering, arguing with something down there in the dark, like a couple is bickering in public, but they're trying to hide it. You need to leave. You need to get the fuck out of here and never come back. I don't know any of them. I don't know anybody. Is that you? Who's with you? Who's making all that noise? You're just gonna stand down there and call my name all night? Well, why don't you come up here then? You think I don't know what you're doing? The last thing she said was, "We don't know. Leave us alone." She shouted it so loud it took me off guard and momentarily paralyzed me with fear. I rushed over and grabbed her before she could fall down the stairs. She told me to get off of her and that she didn't need any help, then brushed past me towards the bedroom. Along the way, she vomited. I got to spend another hour trying to clean that up while she slept soundly. And guess what? New stain. It wasn't until writing this that I realized the stain has been making its way closer and closer to the bedroom. This morning before work, I talked to Faye about what happened. She had no recollection of any of it, including barfing up our expensive dinner, but she did say she heard several voices outside the house early this morning. She said there was a child calling out, "Where is she? Where is she?" and a man grumbling angrily. But she couldn't make out his words. She also said I was talking in my sleep this morning, which is something that I almost never do. Faye agreed to see a doctor again because of the vomiting, and also mentioned to me, after reading the Reddit comments, that hypnosis might be a good thing to try. So we are looking for one in our town. More on that if anything develops. Also, her older sister, Becca, is going to come into town for a few days to visit us and see how things are going. Becca lives in Arizona with her husband and infant son. So, I've only ever actually met her a handful of times. It'll be nice having some extra people in the house for once. In other news, Nathan is still not returning my calls, so I might try the Ranger tonight. I also want to let you all know that it's finals week, both for me as a graduate student and for the undergraduate students that I teach. I might not be able to update every other day like I usually do. If I'm missing for a day or two extra, don't be alarmed. I'm keeping a close eye on Faye. And I have one last thing to report. Today at lunch, I put my head down in my office and drifted off for a few minutes. This is also unusual for me because I'm a chronic insomniac and do not take naps almost ever. But I had another dream. T-Way came to me. For those of you who don't know, T-Way was a Native American man who lived near Pikes Peak. Him and his son, Nathan, blessed our cabin and helped Faye and me in our struggle last month. He died in the woods under mysterious circumstances during my last nights at the cabin. In the dream, I was looking out our bedroom window, and T-Way was standing at the tree line across the street. It was really him, not the creature that did a horrifying impersonation of him. He was pointing into the forest. I think I'm gonna go in there, but I don't know whether I can trust my own dreams anymore. That is where the imposter hides, after all. Edit. I literally just got to work 30 minutes ago and got a call from Faye's boss. I'm on their emergency contact list. They sent her home for behaving erratically. I'm on my way now. Sorry for the long wait. No sleep. I really do appreciate your concern. I can't even describe how busy I am right now. Faye's older sister Becca and baby son Caleb are here, staying in the guest room. It's finals next week for my students, so I'm hosting tons of meetings with them, and I've got only one of 3 major projects done for my doctoral advisor. I'm grading a huge stack of essays. Oh, and something is trying to steal my fiance's skin or mind control her into killing me or something. So, yeah, it's been pretty busy around here. I want to be absolutely transparent about something because a lot of people have been asking me. Yes, this is a series. Is now being turned into a book, I guess, at the behest of a humongous amount of No Sleep and Story Pick readers. We successfully crowdfunded it this week. I did not mention any of this in any of my posts because Reddit has strict rules against advertisement. And I have grown very fond of the community here on No Sleep. I really never want to get in trouble. Secondly, I feel that my experiences at the cabin and the subsequent events are becoming overlong. And my biggest fear is that people here are going to get sick of hearing from me. So I'm going to try my best to post less and just say more. Friday morning. My ass hasn't even been warmed to the seat in my office before I got a call from Faye's boss, notifying me that Faye has been acting erratic. Erratic? In fact, to the point that they sent her home from work. She apparently stood in the open doorway of one of the storehouses, staring into the darkness within, not moving for several minutes. A coworker tried twice to get her to snap out of it, but she did not. A few minutes later, the boss came over and found Faye inside, standing in the shadows, looking out. It was pitch black inside the storehouse, so when the boss flipped on the lights, she found Faye standing there in the corner, just smiling up at her, eyes unfocused. A few seconds later, she came right out of it and went back to work. About an hour later, my fiancée allegedly claimed that she could feel eyes on her while she was working and had to go inside the break room to sit down. Her coworkers found her fast asleep and just left her there, thinking she was hungover or sick, and went to lunch. When they came back, Faye was sleepwalking in large circles around the perimeter of the room, singing a lullaby. This scared the other employees so much that they got the park manager to actually drive her home. They didn't trust her to drive. Now, Faye has to take a drug test because they think she's on drugs. Thankfully, she's completely clean. When I got home, I immediately took Faye to urgent care, who miraculously got us in a reasonable amount of time. We explained everything. I thought the doctors would think we were insane, but both of them actually looked scared shitless. After a CAT scan, a blood panel, and several other small blood tests, they concluded that Faye seems to be healthy, but needs a full psychiatric evaluation. They gave us a referral and we made an appointment, but it's 2 weeks out. We'll have the blood panel back sooner. When we got home, Faye took a nap, and I went out into the woods across the street from our neighborhood. When I saw T-Way in my dream, for those of you who aren't caught up, it's pronounced T-Way, and we still don't know how he died. I wandered around between the trees, trying to figure out if there was something I needed to find. For about 10 minutes, I searched and found nothing. But then I remembered the phrase that many of the voices at the cabin kept repeating. Up in the trees, or down in the hole. You go up in the trees, or all the way down. Down, down. So deep, you never see the light again. There were so many variations of that phrase, I can't remember them all, but I looked up at the top of the trees, and voila, there was a little, crudely constructed object made from twigs and twine, dangling from a branch about 30 feet off the ground. It looked kind of like the dream catcher we found at the cabin, but it was obviously made with twigs from the very tree from which it dangled. So it was a different color and shape. I climbed up the tree and tried to retrieve it, but it was so frail it fell apart the second I pulled it towards me. One thing about it stood out in particular. It had strands of fiery strawberry blonde hair dangling off of it, just like Faye's. I need your opinion on this. As far as I know, Faye can't climb trees. Then again, there's apparently a lot I don't know about Faye. My fiancé went out around 7 p.m. and picked up her sister Becca from the airport. She insisted I stay at home and rest. I think she feels bad about how often she drives me to sleep. I reluctantly obliged. They came home at about 9 p.m. and with them was Becca's son, Caleb. I know nothing about babies, but Caleb is pretty cool. He cries less than my students and is even smarter than half of them. And Faye adores him. Becca and I caught up over hot chocolate in the living room while Faye unleashed the full scope of her material instincts upon Caleb upstairs. She sang lullabies, laughed, cooed, and basically went mommy crazy. I know that when Becca leaves, I'm gonna have to deal with Faye crying and wishing we had kids already. Becca is tough as nails, just like her sister, and it comes from being raised in a strict military family. But having a strict dad also teaches girls how to be expert liars. And I got the sense that Becca was selling me all sorts of bullshit when I told her about what we went through at the cabin. Becca is 5 years older than Faye and has already been married twice. She has a 10-year-old daughter with her first husband. She claimed that she only went to the cabin at Pikes Peak once. She said the drive up there made her car sick. So whenever her parents went there with Faye as a little girl, she'd sleep over at a friend's house instead. She also told me she had no idea what the number 5 means to Faye, and dodged me like a minnow when pressed. I got the overwhelming sense that she is deeply troubled by Faye's behavior, and not just because it's creepy, but because she knows something she's not saying. Faye's entire family seems to be keeping me out of the loop about something really big. A very tech-savvy Redditor offered to help me track down Jennifer, and he delivered. When I checked my email the night before bed, he had provided me with an email address and phone number of Jennifer's husband. She remarried after Tom hung himself. Tom was so deeply disturbed by his experiences at the cabin that he couldn't take it, even after moving to Nevada. Or maybe he just couldn't take Jennifer. I emailed the guy. His name is William, and he got back to me the next day and asked me to call him. I explained the situation to him. He informed me that he and Jennifer had moved to Washington State years ago, but she started abusing prescription medication a year into their marriage. Over the course of a few weeks, she repeatedly told William she heard her daughter, who died in childhood, calling out to her from the forest outside their home. One night when William got home from work, the back door was open and Jennifer was gone. She left with her shoes and jacket. Jennifer went missing for almost 6 months. A group of campers found her remains about 40 miles away. She had been buried in the ground, with her legs sticking out. They had been gnawed clean by wolves. That night, I woke up to the sound of a baby crying. Faye was gone. My first thought was that it was coming from her because a few weeks ago she had accurately mimicked the sound of a child's cries while walking around the house at night. But this time, it was Caleb. I walked down the hall that led to the guest room and found the door open. Becca wasn't there, and the crib was empty. I followed the sounds downstairs, walking past the barf stain on the wall. I'm gonna strip it today. I saw Faye and Becca sitting on the couch. Faye was cradling Caleb in her arms, staring at him, and Becca was babbling on and on about her husband. She didn't notice that Faye was actually asleep. When Faye looked up at me, only the whites of her eyes showed. They were rolled back in her head. She was completely out of it, and she smiled. I stood there for a second, just really disturbed at the scene, and didn't say anything. Suddenly, something moved just outside the sliding glass door behind them. The door that leads to our tiny little garden. It was almost pitch black out there, but the black shape of a man, a huge man, moved away from the glass and vanished into the darkness. Someone had been watching them play with Caleb. I took off out the front door, hoping to circle around and intercept the man. We live in a housing complex that has a walkway that goes behind all of the houses. And the only thing separating it from each backyard is a tiny little wooden gate that you can literally step over. It's mostly to keep dogs and rodents out, but I ran up and down the path and found nothing at all. There was, however, an oily black substance on the ground about 10 yards away from our back patio. Last night, Faye started mumbling more lullabies in her sleep. I'm guessing it's probably because she's been thinking about Becca and Caleb's visit, and she loves the kids so much. She also said, "He's in the stains. He gets up and walks around in the dark." I took the advice of a few Redditors and asked her, "Faye, what'd you forget?" She paused for a long time, then replied, "He needs me." Right when she said it, a child laughed somewhere outside. Tomorrow, the Shoshone woman who visited us last month is going to come back with her friend who specializes in hypnosis. I will report the results when I can. Again, please forgive me if it takes me a bit longer. This week has been a nightmare. Update. I finally got a call from Nathan. More on that soon. The last time I updated, Faye's older sister, Becca, came to visit us with her infant son, Caleb. The presence of the child seems to have awakened something in Faye, because her sleep disturbances have become more erratic, and her unusual behavior has intensified. They stayed for almost a week, but left abruptly after a few weird experiences with Faye. Becca seemed to be growing angry with Faye over the course of a few days, although I could never really discern why. One night when Faye was asleep, Becca and I sat on the couch and talked more about what has been happening. I asked her why she seemed so hostile towards her sister that day. She wouldn't even speak to her, and Becca replied that Faye really has a problem letting things go. If she's mad at someone, she's mad for weeks. If she's hurt for years. She can't forgive, and she can't forget. I asked, "Did you do something to make her mad? Are you two fighting?" Becca denied that they were having any sort of conflict, and said that she was just speaking in general terms. Having grown up with Faye, I asked if there was something in the past that made Faye angry, and Becca sharply responded, "Nobody did anything to Faye. Nothing happened to her." At that point, she stood up and went upstairs, claiming she needed to check on Caleb, and closed the door without saying goodnight. Faye is sometimes difficult to handle because she's proud and stubborn, and the strongest person I've ever met, but Her sister is like an obsidian wall. You can't get any information out of her. You can't read her poker face. You can't know what she's really thinking, ever. But I know that she knows something. And maybe I can't get it out of her, but I figured I'd be able to get it out from Mom. Becca and Faye's mom, Laura, agreed to Skype chat with me this week. This time I'm going for the throat. I successfully removed all of the vomit stains from the house, so Faye isn't talking to them in the dark anymore. But she is still getting worse. I feel like she's slipping away. Seeing Faye holding Caleb on the couch with her eyes rolled back in her head and smiling was one of the most disturbing memories I have of this entire ordeal. There is something about Faye and that child that deeply upsets me. But I've been keeping quiet and trying to make sure that Caleb is safe. I have no reason to believe that Faye would ever hurt another person, except for the one time in college when she punched out a drunk girl at a party for grabbing my ass and saying I'd hit it. But as far as animals and children go, Faye is angelic. The night that Becca stormed off to bed mid-conversation, Faye did something odd. I woke up to her mumbling in the dark, and when I turned on the light, she was standing at the far end of the bed, cradling a pillow in her arms and swaying back and forth, half singing a lullaby. The words were unrecognizable, but the melody sounded distantly familiar. I called out to her and asked, "Sweetie, what are you doing?" She replied in a low, grumbling voice, "I always wanted to be a big sister." Her speech was slurred. She sounded drugged. I got up and gently ushered her back to bed and took the pillow away. When I did, she said, "Now I want to be a mommy." I rubbed her neck and assured her that I do want to start a family with her someday, and that she would be a great mom. She then murmured, "He's a little corpse." "What do you mean, baby?" But she never replied. She just started that rhythmic breathing that lets you know that your partner is fast asleep. Angela visited our house again the next evening, just after the sun went down. For those who don't know or don't recall, Angela belongs to the Shoshone tribe in California and is the daughter of a very important tribe elder. She first visited me and Faye when we got back to California and told us that a malevolent spirit called the Hollow One was infatuated with my fiancé. She said that there was a dark cloud over Faye that could not be easily removed. This time, Angela brought her friend, who is a hypnosis, and they inspected the house and the yard. We told them about the barf stains and that Faye claimed he's in the stains, and he gets up at night and walks around in the dark. Then, in private, I told them about baby Caleb's presence and how it exaggerated Faye's behavior. I also showed them where I found the new dream catcher. Angela said that this entity has many names and is known to several different Native American groups. It is older than the Skinwalkers, and the progenitor is of many evil spirits that inhabit different places near the Rocky Mountains and Southwest. Her friend referred to it as a soul trader that snatches up a person's essence and takes it down into the dark, then enters the body to seek out more victims. I don't know where the dark is, but allegedly that is where Faye is headed. With too much exposure to the thing, both Faye and I had become tainted by it. This is why we are vomiting dark bile, and the stains still carried remnants of that evil. Angela spoke with Faye for a long time, and concluded that she was still Faye, but on her way to somewhere else. She is making a spiritual journey into a place that she thinks is good and safe, but in reality, she is being coaxed out of this world. Despite what happened to us, a lot of this whimsical, metaphysical talk is something. It's sometimes hard for me to swallow, but the hypnosis session with Faye did a good job at convincing me that there is something here inside the house with us, and it's always watching. The hypnotist had Faye lie in our bed, and we brought chairs from the dining room upstairs to sit with her. She put a hand on Faye's forehead and hummed a chant for a while, then covered Faye's eyes with her palm and asked her a few questions. There were things like, "What is your name?" and "Who is your fiancé?" All of Faye's answers were normal. Then the hypnotist hummed some more and lifted her hand. Faye's eyes were rolled back in her head, which only happens when she's in a sleepwalking state. Her mouth was twitching a little bit. The hypnotist asked, "Who are you?" And she responded, "I am Faye." The important parts of the conversation went a bit like this. "Faye, can you tell us who is in this house?" Faye raised her arm slowly and pointed each person in the room out and said their name, even though she was not looking at them. She knew where everyone was. Felix, Becca, Angela, you. And then she pointed at the wall and said, "Caleb, he was in the other room." The hypnotist asked, "Is there anyone else? What about the man who has been following you?" She shook her head and said, "Right now, he's outside." We all glanced out the window to the tree line where I had first seen the figure walking back and forth in the middle of the night, mimicking Faye's sleepwalking. This time, there was no one there. Angela asked, "What does he say to you? Is he talking to you right now?" Faye replied, "I can't hear him. He's facing the other way." The hypnotist asked, "What are the dream catchers for? Who makes them?" Faye did not respond. She just smiled a bit. I butted in and said, "Honey, I found your hair wrapped into a dream catcher outside. Did you do that?" She put her finger to her lips and shushed me. Then she put her palm flat against the wall, like she was feeling for a pulse. After a moment, she said, "He's here." Right when she finished her sentence, Caleb burst into tears. Becca and Angela rushed out of the room to go check on him. The hypnotist and I remained with Faye. The hypnotist finally went for broke and said, "Faye, you wrote the number 5 on the window in the other room. You wrote it backwards. Why did you do that? What does it mean? Did you write it for someone outside to see?" In that moment, Faye's eyes rolled forward, and her little green irises finally showed. She immediately looked towards the door that led into the hall and said, No, he's listening now." Then she began hyperventilating and struggled to speak the words, "He'll find out." The last thing she said was, "Felix, my name," in a deep, guttural voice. It wasn't her own. Then the hypnotist pressed her hand against Faye's eyes and spoke a loud command in her native language. I think it was Shoshone, but I'm not actually sure what group she's affiliated with. Faye immediately woke up and seemed very confused about where she was. Then she started crying and reached out for me. I hurried over and held her in my arms. Her body was so cold, it was like she was a corpse. When she was crying, she said, "He wants to kill you. He wants you dead. I saw you in the trees." Angela and the hypnotist, I haven't given her name, by the way, because I don't want you to have to memorize a million names, hurried around the house, blessing it in burning sage. Then also recommended I call in a Catholic priest for Faye's personal comfort, since she is a Catholic. They left after a few words of parting, and Becca seemed really angry and scared at this point. She remained in her room for the rest of the night. I got a call about an hour later from Angela, who told me that she had discussed the situation with the hypnotist, and they believe that Faye is in extreme denial about something, perhaps some sort of trauma, and they said that she had repressed it so well that it was co-assigned to a place in her subconscious that only years of therapy or hypnosis could unearth. It was in a place in her mind that could never, ever be accessed by talking to her in her sleep. This is where the number 5 rests, and that is why the entity hasn't found it yet, despite communicating with Faye in her sleep virtually every night. He was drilling her brain like miners digging for gold, and the fun didn't end there. We all went to sleep pretty early that night because of all the drama, but as I've learned on so many other occasions, going to sleep upset usually results in a night terror or some other sleep disturbance for Faye. At about 2 a.m., she leapt out of bed, jolted me awake in the process, and bombed it down the hall like there was a fire. She started bashing her fist against the door to the guest room, but didn't utter a single word. Her eyes were shut. I flicked on the light and stood there in the hall just for a second, scared stiff. But when baby Caleb started crying, I snapped out of it and rushed over. I bear hugged my fiancée to try to get her to stop making so much noise, and in return she tried to bite me. Faye has never been violent towards me in her life, even in her sleep. She is always a very passive sleep talker, creepy but passive. This time she was trying to rip my throat out. She was trying to draw blood. I fended her off and sort of apprehended her, then walked her back to the bedroom. She was basically wearing me like a straitjacket. When I carefully put her back in bed, she whispered, "You'll go up in the trees." He went down in the hole. Becca was understandably furious the next day, but she swallowed her anger and drove Faye down to the Catholic church at the town center. I went to work. Apparently they finally got one of the priests to agree to visit next week to bless the house. They explained that this wouldn't be enough, so he said he'd speak with the bishop of his coeds, and that could take a while. That evening, Becca informed me that she had changed her flight, and she now intended to leave in 2 days. I begged her to set aside her differences with Faye and try to help her through it. I said Faye needs her big sister right now, but Becca wouldn't budge. She seems to be holding a monolithic grudge about something neither of them will tell me. I ordered pizza, Faye's favorite, in a lame attempt at lightening the mood around the house, but the two would only have casual, light conversation with each other, and the tension in the house was so thick I could feel it in my stomach. Faye and I retired to our room early and watched the Game of Thrones in bed. We always recorded on Sunday because Faye is at work, and we just watch it during the week. Asked her if she remembered telling me the imposter wanted me dead, or that I was going to be put in the trees. She said she did not recall any of that, but that she did have a dream about seeing me impaled on the tree branch high up in the air. She said my skin and hair were missing. Faye fell asleep pretty quickly, but I couldn't sleep at all. I remember that Nathan T-Way's son, had left me a voicemail a few days prior, and I had forgotten to call back. So I grabbed my phone and went downstairs. The room was quiet. Becca and Caleb were already asleep upstairs. I turned on the TV on low to mask my conversation with Nathan. It was midnight in Colorado, but he still answered the phone and asked me how everything was. I told him everything. Nathan had a lot to say. He apologized for making me and Faye sick, but said that a simple purging process was a very common treatment for many physical and spiritual maladies in his tribe. However, by my description of the barf staying events, it absolutely did not work, and we were still under the influence of the imposter. He said if we were back to Colorado, he would bring us to the elders of his community and request that they perform a more serious healing ritual. I told him that would be Faye's call entirely, but I doubt she would go, or that the imposter would let her. Last month, when I was in the cabin by myself, there was a blizzard that shut down the only road down the mountain. The ranger couldn't come up to check on me, but T-Way and Nathan, being the badass gentlemen they are, actually hiked up the mountain through the snow and checked up on me. You can read that at the bottom of this post, if you haven't. But basically, their hike back down, they heard Faye's voice calling out to them from inside one of the abandoned mines on Pikes Peak. T-Way went to investigate and was dragged into the dark by an unseen creature or animal. Nathan eventually found him dead, and parts of his skin had been flayed. The reason that I hadn't been able to get a hold of Nathan for several days was because he and a group of men from his community went back to Pikes Peak to investigate the circumstances of his father's death and to explore the cabin. They camped for a few nights and even spent one night in the woods next to the cabin. Nathan heard T-Way's voice calling out for help over and over again, crying and speaking Nathan's name. However, occasionally the voice would cry out in Zuni, which is a language that some Pueblo tribes speak, but their tribe does not. They speak Hopi, or however you say it, again, sorry. So Nathan was fairly certain that this was not, in fact, his father. They also heard children weeping in the forest. One of Nathan's friends left the tent to take a piss, and he claims he saw a naked child with grayish skin standing a dozen yards off, facing away, looking up at the trees. He looked like a stiff corpse, and was standing high up on the balls of his feet. The sight apparently scared Nathan's friend so bad he took off, grabbing his things, and went to hike back down the mountain, in the dark, in the cold, and by himself. Nathan and the others tried to stop him, but it was too dangerous to go after him. They hadn't seen him since. Nathan told me that he had recurring dreams of a child while on the mountain. Of a child and the Fae. He said to me, "Tell me about the child, Felix." During our conversation, I had been standing in the living room facing the sliding glass door, looking out into the backyard. Right when Nathan said, "Tell me about the child," I saw a large shadow move behind the orange tree outside. I told Nathan to hold on for a sec. I went to grab the flashlight from the kitchen. When I got there, I almost collapsed in fright. The front door was wide open. From my front door, you can see the tree line across the street. Someone was walking behind the trees. I could see them moving slowly behind them. I set my phone down and ran upstairs to wake Faye and Becca. But Faye wasn't in bed. I frantically rushed over to Becca's room to see if Faye was with her, but Becca was fast asleep and was really disturbed at my urgency when I woke her up. We turned on the light and she went to grab Caleb, but he wasn't in the crib. Faye had brought for him. He was gone. Becca turned into the Hulk in about 0.5 seconds flat, she started shrieking in rage and horror, screaming, "Where is he? Where is my baby?" over and over. We dashed around the house looking for Faye and Caleb, but we couldn't find them. And then I realized that she had taken him outside. We ran outside there barefoot straight to the trees and came up behind Faye. My fiancée was standing there in her underwear, looking up into the trees. Her arms were outstretched, holding Caleb up in the air, as if offering him to someone above. High up on one of the tree branches was the dream catcher, the one I had taken down and broken only days earlier. Now it was intact. Becca grabbed Caleb out of Faye's hands and shoved her to the ground, then took the baby back inside. I picked up Faye and rushed her back into the house. Neighbors were starting to come out of their homes to see what all the commotion was. Faye woke up on our way back up the stairs and broke down crying, apologizing to both of us. Becca packed up all of her things and stormed out of the house, grabbing Faye's car keys, and drove off. The police showed up within a few minutes, and I had to explain to them that the sisters had been fighting and that it got taken out outside. I said that Faye was drunk, so she took it a bit far and ran off across the street. Thankfully, no one saw the baby, so I didn't get arrested for child endangerment. What else could I have said? They'd never believe me if I told them the truth. They checked Faye out to make sure that she hadn't got beaten up and asked her repeatedly if I was treating her right. Then they left. Becca drove straight to the airport. Faye and I had to go pick up the car the next day. I've got a Skype chat scheduled with Faye's mom tomorrow. Becca texted me and said, "Ask her about 5. She knows." If I get any answers out of her, I'll post a brief update here. But I won't make another post for a while. I'm sorry. Thank you for all the support over the past month. Now I need to try and put all the broken pieces of my home life back together. I'm sorry for the length of this post. It is enormous. I actually have to split it into 2 because of Reddit's word count limit, but this is it. For better or for worse, the end has finally come. After I post the other half of this update in a few days, I will never speak of these events again. I have lost far too much, and it hurts me too deeply to continue. It has been a long time since I talked about my fiancée and the events surrounding our vacation at her parents' cabin in Colorado. But I think enough time has passed. I have finally unearthed the secrets Faye's family has been hiding from me. No Sleep has been remarkably supportive. So even though what I'm about to tell you is deeply personal, you've helped us get this far. You deserve to know what I've been, or what we found. We moved 2 weeks ago. I got a new job, so we found a new place a few towns over. It's only an hour's drive from our old place. And it's the same distance from Faye's work, but in the opposite direction. As if by the law of horror film cliches, the strange activity that plagued us that night ceased entirely for a week when we moved to our new place. However, it started up again after a while, just as I feared it might. Our new home had not yet been blessed by Angela when the activity started up again. She is the daughter of a Shoshone tribal elder who saged and blessed our home a few weeks prior. The imposter has not given up on Faye. Its game is to wear us down until we just give up. The new house. I had a Skype chat set up with Faye's very retreated mother, but per No Sleep's warnings, I waited until after we moved. The fear was that Laura might divulge something over the Skype that the imposter could use against us. The more it discovers about us, the more closer it can mimic me and any of Faye's family members, living or dead. When she is asleep, Faye is highly susceptible to suggestion. The running hypnosis No Sleep has developed is that there are certain things the imposter needs to know about Faye in order to fully infiltrate her, to control her, or to kill her. We don't really know what its plans are to do with her yet. But we do know that it is especially curious about the significance of the number 5, which Faye drew on the window while sleepwalking. She gets agitated anytime 5 is brought up, but cannot coherently explain why. I think that once it learns the meaning of the number, it will have full access to Faye and will be able to do whatever it's planning with her. I sat down on the couch with my laptop and Skyped Laura around 10 p.m. one night, about half an hour after Faye had fallen asleep. I had to be extremely aggressive in order to break Laura's walls of lies about her family's past, and just when she seemed ready to crack, Faye walked out of the bedroom. We now live in a 1-story house. It was dark in the hall, so she scared the shit out of me when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. She stood there in the shadows, rigid and still. Her entire body was stiff, and her head was craned all the way back in a painful position. Her chin pointed at the ceiling, and her arms were straight up in the air in a hallelujah gesture. She hadn't sleepwalked in a while now, so I immediately told Laura I'd call her back and jumped up. Faye shushed me and wiggled her fingers, arms still outstretched. She looked like a praying mantis in repose. I asked, "Faye, what is it?" She smiled and replied, "Did you know about her?" She closed her hands, and one of her fingers pointed at the ceiling. I said I didn't know what she was talking about, and asked, "What? No what?" I looked up at the ceiling and saw nothing. Faye paused. She typically pauses for long periods between sentences while sleep talking, and then said, "There's an old woman up there. She lives in the attic. She's so friendly. She remembered my birthday." My skin crawled. It felt like insects skittering under my clothes when she said that. Faye says a lot of disturbing things, and I've grown used to it, but occasionally she still surprises me. I asked her more about this old woman, and she said, "She sleeps right above our bed." Faye brought her arms down to her sides, and her muscles relaxed. She stopped answering my questions. I walked her back into the bedroom and gently tucked her in. That night, I lay awake in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. I imagined the corpse of an old woman stuck upside down inside the drywall, dangling or from the rafters in the attic. I couldn't shake the feeling that our unwanted guest had moved in with us. I was now pretending to be a friendly stranger to trick Faye. That night, I dreamt of a dark stain spreading itself out across the ceiling in the shape of a large man, just like the vomit stains in our old house a few weeks prior. As I was asleep, I thought I heard something heavy dragging itself around up there. Laura called the following evening. Faye wasn't home from work yet, so we had a good hour-long conversation before things got uncomfortable. I had to spend a lot of time getting her back into that emotional space she was, and then where she couldn't open up about her daughter. When she finally did, I was astonished. It felt like the first time Laura had ever told me the truth about anything. I don't have any proof that she was being honest, but I can hear it in her voice. It is
true that Faye was 5 years old when she developed her unusual sleep disorder, but the number 5 does not symbolize that. It goes a lot deeper. As I mentioned before in previous updates, Faye's parents lied to me and told me she had been visiting the cabin in Pikes Peak regularly throughout her life until she was 13. And Faye, she claimed she had never been there before, ever. In reality, Faye went there a few times as a child, but her last visit was at the age of 5. She and her father, Greg, were outside building a snowman, but then Faye walked to the tree line and began speaking with someone that Greg could not see. She spoke her own name and said a few other things Greg couldn't hear, then had some sort of seizure and became catatonic. When she came to, she cried for hours. But there was apparently more to the story. Just as Faye got home from work and walked in the door, I heard Laura say, "A few months before that, I was pregnant." The second I covered the mouthpiece and said, "Hi, sweetie," Laura hung up the phone. I kept this revelation to myself for a while. Laura didn't return my calls after Faye went to bed. So I never found out what happened to her pregnancy. Did she have a miscarriage, an abortion? Did she give the baby up for adoption? Was it not Greg's child? Millions of questions swarmed my mind. I didn't sleep at all, and I could barely hide my thoughts from Faye. She knew something was wrong. She's quite perceptive and can read me like a book. But I acted like I had a stomach ache and went to bed. That night, I had an absolute terrible dream, probably the worst one I have ever had. In it, an adult Faye attacked her pregnant mother. She was sleepwalking, but screaming wildly and pummeling her mother, just like she had pummeled the guest bedroom door when her sister and infant nephew visited us last month. There was blood everywhere in the dream, and Faye ran off into the woods with the fetus. It was so violent I jolted awake, nearly screaming. When I woke up, Faye was sitting upright in bed, staring out the window. She was awake. I could tell because her posture was normal, and her eyes weren't rolled back in her head, or blissfully sealed shut. She said, "Did you hear it too?" It took me a while to figure out where I was. When I saw her sitting there in a pristine white t-shirt, I sighed in relief. There was no blood anywhere. It was just a dream. Before I could answer her question, I heard a baby crying. We live in a bigger suburban neighborhood now, so it was entirely possible that it was just a sound from one of the houses nearby. But Faye's reaction to it really disturbed me. The look on her face made me think the sound was causing her physical pain. She cringed and shut her eyes. Try not to cry. I cupped her face in my hands and told her it was okay. But as I did, another voice rang out from the dark. It was a little girl, and she was speaking as if to a baby. From what I could hear, she said, "When do we go inside?" "Up in the trees." "Where?" Starting to cry. "Not in the hole, not down there." Faye started crying too. I looked out the window but couldn't see anything. She had no explanation for why she was so upset, other than, "He's back. He's here. I know it's him." I didn't want to scare her, but I completely agreed. I had a missed call from Nathan the next morning when I woke up. It was Saturday, and Faye and I had plans to get new furniture at IKEA. While she was in the shower, I returned Nathan's call. He answered on the first ring. He sounded terrible. The first thing he said was, "Felix, do you know anything about the child?" A few weeks prior, he had said, "Tell me about the child." And I had no idea what he was talking about. Now, I had a pretty clear idea, so I whispered to him that Faye's mother had been pregnant when Faye was 5. But I had no idea what became of the baby. He told me to get as much information from Laura as possible, at all costs, but keep it from Faye. He also told me that he was going to mail us a special herbal mixture, mugwort, damania, and sally, or something, to make into tea before bed. He said it promotes good dreams and therefore would shield us from some of the imposter's intrusions. I asked Nathan to explain what he meant. He said very simply, the imposter does not read minds. It reads dreams. This was an astonishing revelation to me. It explains so much about the cabin. The imposter mimicked Faye's grandfather because she probably had a dream about him at the cabin. And it mimicked my mother for the same reason. It mimicked the people that Greg saw die in war because he frequently had nightmares about them. The former cabin owner, Jennifer, heard her dead daughter's voice in the forest at night because she regularly dreamed about her. Who wouldn't have painfully dreams of their own child's death? The creature mimics the people it learns about through the dreams of its victims and repeats them in the forest to coax those victims inside. It also listens to the things people say while they're awake. This is why we heard so many unrecognizable and familiar voices at the same time. Some of those voices belong to other victims. That thing wanders around in the dark, learning from its target, sharpening its skills, and pretending. This is how it hunts. So, since I was getting nearer to the significance of the number 5, the information the imposter so desperately sought, Faye was in greater danger. My own dreams could betray our safety. Nathan continued, and I'm just paraphrasing because I can't remember everything. Faye is the most fascinating person the imposter has ever encountered. Her dreams are mysterious to it. She is a puzzle to be solved, and most of all, when it speaks to her through her dreams, she speaks back. I guess you could say it has a very dark fixation on her. Perhaps even love. A putrid form of it, anyway. It was true. Faye mirrored the imposter's darkness. When it looked into her, it didn't find all of the hopes and dreams and fears it saw in others. Instead, it saw a deep wall of impenetrable blackness, and it knew there was something hidden beneath it. Whatever it plans to do with the information it seeks, it knows that 5 is the light that will reveal the bottom of that well and everything inside of it. Cold sweat matted every inch of my skin during this conversation. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear so as not to miss a word. I asked, why does it even need Faye to find the answer? Her parents probably know what that number means too. Nathan said something in his native language, as though he were speaking to a person sitting in the room with him. Then he said, her parents haven't been to the cabin in a very long time. Its connection to them is weak. Maybe it can't keep hold of someone for very long if they aren't on the mountain. After all, Faye has had her sleep disorder since she first went to Pikes Peak. But as the years passed, this entity faded from her life. It only returned when she came back. I heard the shower turn off. The glass door slid open, and Faye began moving around the bathroom. I walked outside onto the patio and closed the door behind me. But what does it want, Nathan? I mean, once it learns everything it needs, what does it plan to do? Nobody will give me a straight answer. Again, Nathan said something I could not understand. He was talking to someone else. Perhaps one of the elders of his community was with him. It is one of the old evils, he said. Our people have believed in them since the beginning. When a person dies, sometimes they become what do you call them? I believe your people call them a wraith. a haunting. But these entities were here long before. So many horror films Faye and I had carefully and cheerfully watched came flooding into mind. So like a demon, I said. I can't tell you how many movies I've seen where a family finds out that a ghost in their house is actually a demon, and for a few obscure reasons, that's much worse. I felt like I was about to be given a speech. Nathan cleared his throat. Well, no, not exactly. We don't believe in hell or an equivalent place. Our interpretation of the other worlds is very complex, but basically, this type of entity, they take you away. Not your body, but your spirit. They take it out into the dark, away from this world and its light, so far away, entities upon entities away. The distance drives your spirit completely mad, and then you become one of them. That's what it does. He separates you from where you are supposed to go in the afterlife. It steals you from yourself. So yeah, good news all around. I also asked Nathan how he was coping with his father's death and pointed out he sounded especially dreary today. Again, I expressed my condolences and said that I was most honored to have known T-Way and that we are alive because of him. Nathan replied that he knows his father's spirits live on through his family and in the sacred earth where they live. For that reason, he does not mourn his death. However, Nathan also said something that made my hand go cold as I clutched the phone. He said, I keep having the same nightmare every night. It keeps me awake when it's over. I'm exhausted. I asked him to tell me about the dream, as I had been having terrible ones lately too. It's the cabin. I could see in my dreams. It's sitting there in the dark, and there is a bad storm. I'm standing in the distance looking at it. A light turns on inside, and I walk towards it. As I approach, the front door slowly opens, and something in my heart tells me not to step inside, but I do. Every single time I step in. When I'm inside, the lights cut out, and it's very dark. From the living room, I can hear my father's voice calling out to me from the bedroom. He is speaking in our language and sounds happy and peaceful. He tells me to come to him and that he wants to see my face before he goes to be with our ancestors. He calls me Hanto, my light, the nickname I was given as a child. But when I go to push the bedroom door open, I wake up to the sound of a child crying. Every time. Nathan went on to explain that he feels these dreams are a sign and that he must return to the cabin and the site of T-Way's death. I said it could be a trap, you know. In fact, I'm sure it is. Nathan spoke once more in his language to whoever was in the room with him, and then paused. He finally sighed and said, "You might be right, but it really does feel like him." I made him promise not to go back to the cabin. He agreed and said he'd call me in a few days. I thanked him again for his father's sacrifice. A few days passed in relative peace. Laura did not return my calls, and Becca, Faye's sister, did not return my texts. The standoffish of this family drives me absolutely fucking insane. When Faye and I got home from doing groceries one evening, a package had arrived in the mail. It contained the herbs Nathan had talked about, with the instructions on how to make them into tea. Not too much. Read the little note. Faye brewed some of it and drank it, and when she was finished, I jokingly told her, "Actually, we are sending you on a fishing quest. This is going to be really intense." She was not amused. I thought it was funny though. We both slept soundly that night. No bad dreams, no strange activity outside, no weird sounds. The next morning there was a knock on the door. So it only woke me up. I'm the light sleeper insomniac of the family. I snuck out of bed, trying not to wake up Faye, and crept to the door. It was Laura. She had come to our new house, totally unannounced and uninvited. I immediately knew there was something about to be a shitstorm. I couldn't begin to imagine what she was doing here, but I knew by the look on her face that there was trouble. I invited her inside and informed her that Faye was still asleep, and she was actually relieved and said she wanted to talk to me alone. From her bag, she produced a photo album. We sat on the couch where she quietly apologized to me for everything, for being constantly evasive, for lying, and for letting us go to the cabin in the first place. I waved away her ramblings and demanded to know what the purpose of her visit was. I had absolutely had enough of all of this shit and wanted to get to the bottom of things. Laura dropped her voice to a whisper and opened the photo album. As she turned the pages, I realized that it was actually a scrapbook, a very elaborate one that had probably taken years of effort to construct. There were photos, drawings, designs, letters, postcards, even a necklace and some flattened flowers. I saw pictures of Faye I had never seen before. She was absolutely adorable as a child. Her glowing smile poked out from beneath little strawberry lockets in her photo. Laura said, "This is what I wanted to show you." I don't know how to talk to Faye about it. I was amazed. It took expert handiwork to craft something like this. "You made this?" I asked. She flipped further into the scrapbook and revealed a few old pictures of herself in later stages of pregnancy. The centerpiece of one of the pages was a photograph of Laura, big-bellied and bearing a youthful smile, and little 5-year-old Faye curiously resting her ear on Mommy's tummy. It was a priceless image, and one that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. "Faye and I put this together, actually," she replied. When she was very little, it made sense. Faye is one of the most talented arts and crafts hobbyists I've ever known. So, what happened?" I asked. Laura looked over her shoulder and down the hall. She obviously feared Faye waking up. "His name was Christopher," she said. Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke. When she turned the page, there was a photo of Laura undergoing an ultrasound and giving a thumbs up. He was stillborn a little over a month after the due date. I had no idea what to say. I felt that saying "I'm sorry" was too empty, so instead I just remained silent. "Placenta abruption," she continued. "It's rare, but it happens." She scooted closer to me on the couch and set the scrapbook on my lap, then grabbed my wrist. She said, "Felix, Faye doesn't remember any of this. We have never, ever spoken of it." I asked how that could be possible, given that she was certainly old enough to remember an event like that. Laura explained that the emergency occurred while Greg was out with the girls. The paramedics rushed Laura to the hospital, but the baby couldn't be saved. When she and Greg finally decided to break the news to their daughters that Christopher had died, Becca was heartbroken, but Faye did not react. It was as if what they were telling her simply didn't register. Laura would say, "Do you understand that Christopher is never coming home?" And Faye would respond, "Yes, Mom," with a blank expression. This went on for weeks. Faye would occasionally ask about Christopher, as if he'd be visiting soon. And then suddenly, she'd not remember anything about it, as if he never existed. She began to act out at school and would throw violent tantrums for no reason. A child psychologist warned that Faye was not handling the situation well. So Laura and Greg decided to spend several days up in the cabin with the girls in hopes of separating little Faye's mind from the heavy event. That's when it happened. Whatever it is that lives in the forest up there, up in the trees or down in the hole, took notice of Faye. It wanted to learn more, but her little brain shut down in terror when it got too close. Laura said, after that day, Faye never spoke of Christopher again, and seems completely unaware that he ever existed. Quite suddenly, Faye's voice erupted from behind us, standing in the hallway, perhaps for a long time. I slammed shut the scrapbook. The air went out of the room. There was an agonizingly long minute of stillness, during which all of us exchanged surprised looks. "What's that?" she finally asked, pointing to the scrapbook on my lap. It was useless. A deer in headlights. Laura got up and got between me and Faye, giving her a hug and asking how Faye felt. She said they needed to talk, but Faye pushed her aside and walked over to the couch. Her fiery eyes locked on the scrapbook and didn't blink. She reached down and opened it. The page she revealed had a colorful cutout of the number 5. It was one of the final pages of the book. Her jaw trembled and tears instantly welled in her eyes. A look of excruciating pain fell over her face, and she began hyperventilating. Laura rounded the couch and tried to assure her, but Faye slapped her hand away and she grabbed the notebook and then raced off to the bedroom. She cried in there for hours and never let us in. I spent the rest of the day alone. Faye never emerged from the bedroom and wouldn't speak to me when I knocked, so I played Overwatch to distract myself from the horrible knots of stress in my stomach. Meanwhile, texting with my best friend Richard and Jason regarding the new developments. When I got up for her drink, I heard the bedroom door click. Faye was ready to let me in. She was sitting on the bed with a scrapbook in her lap when I pushed open the door. I said as gently as I could, "You want to talk about it?" Her face was streaked with hundreds of tears. Her skin was pale, and her eyes they looked lifeless. Never had I seen her in such a state. I considered calling the paramedics for fear that she might hurt herself. She said, "I remember now." I stood there in the doorway, afraid to make a move. I wasn't sure how Faye would react to the knowledge that I had been conspiring with her mother about their secret past. Mom and I spent all summer getting the nursery set up, she said, tracing a finger over the photos. Dad was so excited that he was finally going to have a son. So we did a sports thing. I walked over to the bed and sat down, quiet as a lamb, trying not to trigger another explosion. Faye kept her hands pressed on the scrapbook, as though she were feeling for a pulse. The colorful number 5 rested at the center of the page, laid over various photos. In one, there was a basketball mural painted on the wall with 5 players, and in another, a toddler onesie in the design of a basketball jersey. It displayed the number 5. Faye started crying again and choked out. Christopher was born to be the 5th member of the family. We talked for a long while. Mostly Faye talked. I just quietly watched her face in awe as a deluge of ancient memories flooded her mind. Sometimes she could barely speak. Other times she shook her head and said it was all a dream. Her denial rose and fell in waves, and she grasped at all the faded images in her head and tried to describe them to me with great disdain. A tomb had been unearthed, and Faye was excavating it despite the pain it weathered on her. All I could do was hold her hand through it. That night I made Nathan's tea again, and we both drank it. Faye fell asleep and I stayed awake watching Netflix. Just as I was about to shut off the computer, I heard rustling outside, and then the voice of a little girl. She said, "It's Faye. I can't see you. Who are you?" I walked down the hall and peered out of the blinds in the living room. A dark figure walked right past the window. It scared me half to death. It came from our backyard and no doubt had been standing beside our bedroom window. I ran down the hall and grabbed my sweats and shoes, then bolted out the door and looked all around the property. There, across the road, standing under a street lamp, was a man. His body glowed in pale yellow light, but his face was totally black. He looked nearly 7 feet tall, and one of his shoulders was noticeably higher than the other. His posture was rigid and reminiscent of the way Faye slept-walked. I knew exactly who it was. I can't explain what prompted me to run after him, but I wanted to grab this thing by the neck and beat it to death with my bare hands. Perhaps it was because I was so tired of I was exhausted, my fear instinct hadn't yet kicked in, or perhaps I had just had enough. But instead of clawing me to death right there in the street, the figure turned and ran. I chased after him, screaming at the top of my lungs to stay the fuck away from my family and my house. The thing moved very fast, but limped with a freakish gait. My mind envisioned a real thin creature made of oily black parts, stretching on the costume of a human and graciously lurching around it. This thing was not a person. Its movements were animalistic. Its strides were far too long. Its breath wheezed the air like an antique accordion. And the stench that dragged behind it stung my nose. It smelled like wildfire. "No woods for you to fuck around in out here," I screamed, lights flickering on houses all around me as I chased the figure. It practically galloped and was always 20 feet ahead of me. I chased it down for 2 blocks, around it a few times, and finally bounded over a chain-link fence into the community park, where there were no lights. I couldn't see the damn thing, so I had to run all the way around the other side to get in. The only thing I could see was the silhouette. The figure stood there in the empty field shrouded in the night, gazing up at the moon. The silver outline of its body indicated that it was facing away from me. One of its hands twitched wildly. The other was gnarled up like a driftwood. The sight of it out here, so far from help, unnerved me. I approached it still, committed to ending this nightmare tonight one way or another. My courage evaporated about 10 feet from the figure when it issued a growl I can't even describe. It was so deep I felt it in my rib cage as much as I heard it. I stopped in my tracks, but still managed to say, "You will never take her. You will never have Faye. You will leave us alone forever. Go back to that fucking mountain and bury yourself in the mine." It growled again, then gurgled up a wet laugh. "What is your name?" I asked, in my voice. It had been practicing. It was perfect now. May I come in?" How do you carry on a conversation with an entity that is basically a demonic parrot? I said, much louder this time. "You will leave us alone and go back to the mountain. Faye will never be yours." The imposter emitted the shrieking of an infant. The sound startled me, and felt so wrong coming out of the form of such a large man. It said, in the voice of a child, "You go down in the hole. That's where I'll put you." "Look at me, you little piece of shit," I said. I tried to sound menacing, but in reality I am a coward. Most people can sense it. So there was little doubt that the imposter knew it too. Then it said something that I did not expect. The sound threw me off so much my head spun. "Tell me about the child," it said. Nathan's voice wafted gently from its throat. "Tell me about the child." Before I could speak, the imposter whirled around and squared off with me. There are no words to express the combination of shock and instant despair that I felt. My knees came straight out from under my body, and I fell onto the wet grass. Staring down at me, boring into me with lidless eyes, was the face of Nathan, my friend, my protector, the son of the man who had given his life to help me. Now his skin was hard and bruised, his scalp flayed, his eyes tormented. He'd been stretched over a skull that didn't quite fit a body that rattled with loose, collected bones. A slimy black liquid dribbled down the arms. Perhaps it was blood. It was too dark to tell. It spoke a phrase in the language of Nathan's people, the same one Nathan had uttered over the phone last month. That made me sick. And I began vomiting profusely as I lay there on the ground. "Tell me about the child," they said once more, then smiled. The lips spread and stretched in an expression of malevolent joy, bearing the rotten maw of a long-dead wolf. Nathan's voice seeped out of it. "Let me speak to the one who followed you home." I gasped for air but couldn't command my body to move. The creature took a few steps towards me, and I slammed my eyes shut, expecting to feel those hideous fangs in my neck. But instead, I heard its footsteps approach, and then recede in the opposite direction. When I opened my eyes, the imposter had stepped over me and was walking away. It was already in the distance, moving quickly back towards my neighborhood, towards my house. "Followed you home," it repeated, voice echoing in the cold night air. "Followed you home. Followed you home. I followed you home." When I was 3 years old, my parents and I went with some family friends to a cabin up in the mountains. One of the other family's kids was sick with some sort of flu. A few nights in, I came down with it and threw up everywhere, over and over again. My father was so grossed out that his reaction made me cry. A lot. My mom had to kick him out of the room while she took care of me. His horrified expression imprinted in my mind forever, and taught me that there is something terribly wrong with being sick. I'm 28 years old now, and I spent years of my life being absolutely paranoid about throwing up. Emetophobia controls so much of a person's existence. It makes you afraid to share so much drink, afraid to eat without washing your hands, afraid to get on roller coasters, afraid to fly in planes, afraid to try new things. But at some point after decades with the phobia, you almost forget what causes you to regard all of those things with fear. The possibility of vomiting becomes subconscious. You don't even think about it anymore. You are just afraid of virtually everything that could cause it. And yet you have no immediate explanation for why you are afraid anymore. You just are. Although that possibility no longer lingers at the price of my conscience thoughts, the imposter found it. He went straight to the core of my being and saw what terrifies me the most. He brought it out and used it against me, repeating Nathan's spiritual purge chant, didn't just disable me there in the field, it was a reminder of the creature's remarkable power to turn my own flawed humanity upon me. A reminder that it was planning to make me suffer in the most personal ways. The imposter was designing a personal hell for me, and was nearly ready to drag me down into it. And so the world collapsed on me. I laid there on the ground, puking my guts out, knowing that my fiancé was asleep and unguarded in bed while a terrible being strode towards her through the dark. It called out her name in every voice familiar to her. It said things that would make her happy. It begged for help and mimicked the cries of children. It capitalized on her intimate motherly instincts, on her buried memories, and on the vulnerability of her unconscious state. And all I could do was stagger around and wait for the thrum of my death-gripped heart to subside. After a few moments, moonlight poured back into my vision, lighting the way out of the park. My pulse recovered from its frenzy, and the numbness of my limbs faded. The taste in my mouth, for once, didn't paralyze me. I tore through the streets to get back to my house. I had no plan. A lot of the lights were on in houses that lined my street. Many of my neighbors had likely heard me screaming. I hoped this meant that the imposter would think twice about moving out in the open beneath their watchful gazes. The front door of my house was wide open, and it was pitch dark inside. I shouted for Faye, but couldn't find her. The bed was empty and disheveled, as though she jumped out of it, or had been dragged from it. A faint sound caught my attention, the sound of crying, and I struggled to determine where it was coming from. After looking in every room, I realized it was coming from outside. As I stepped out the sliding glass door in our bedroom that leads to the backyard, the sound grew louder and mixed with shuffling noises. There's a walkway that runs along the side of our house and connects the backyard to the front. And there in the darkness was Faye. She was sleepwalking in the most unusual manner I'd ever seen. She stood high on the balls of her feet, like before, but was bent over at the waist. Her hair and arms dangled lifelessly towards the ground, and she shuffled towards the street where I'd first seen the shadowy figure. Faye's neck was craned in such a way that I could see her face swaying just outside her left thigh. Two mournful eyes peered up from me, and her lips trembled as she cried. I couldn't tell if she was conscious or not. She mumbled something, but with her cries I couldn't make out what she was saying. I wrapped my arms around her waist and literally carried her inside. She clawed at me and landed a tiger palm to my crotch just as we cornered into the living room. A police car drifted by, its lights tracing all across the houses. I gently closed the door and peered out the window. It took me a moment to see it, but in the tree in our front yard, a dark form was crouched on the thickest branch. I yanked the curtains down over the blinds. Faye and I remained awake for the rest of the night until dawn. We heard footsteps on our roof and in the attic, but no voices. On 2 occasions, someone knocked gently on the front door and once on the sliding glass door. But we remained in the living room. We communicated only through pen and paper and prevented each other from nodding off and dreaming about the scrapbook or about Christopher. The last thing she wrote was, "Got an idea. Explain tomorrow." At about 6 a.m., my cell phone buzzed on the table. All had been quiet for a few hours now, and Faye and I were almost done with the second Lord of the Rings movie. When I grabbed the phone, I was surprised to see that it was the ranger from Pikes Peak. His name is Greg, the same as Faye's dad, so I just referred to him by title in these posts. We hadn't spoken in a while. I immediately feared that his call was confirmation of the grim hood and likelihood that Nathan was dead. He skipped all pleasantries and said, "You better sit down." A nauseating fear crept up my throat when he said that. I shook my head and replied, "Just tell me." Static began to form around my peripheral vision, which happens when I'm feeling faint. If it grows and covers my entire field of view, I pass out. The ranger cleared his throat and tried to speak with composure, but I could hear on his voice that he'd been crying. He said, "We got a call from one of Nathan's relatives. Said he's been missing for a few days. Thought he went camping with his buddies, but none of them knew where he was. On my return this morning, I dropped by Folk's cabin. There was a long silence, which told me everything I needed to know. But then the ranger said more. We got cops everywhere up here now. Whole mountains shut down. They still got T-Way listed as a missing person, but now they're out hunting for a body. Like, they mean it this time. Looking for a murderer too, but I interrupted him and demanded to know why. There was no way I could hide the frantic anxiety any longer. The ranger said, "Something's happened up there, up at the cabin. They did something to him. I don't know how to tell you." He paused again, struggling to hold back tears. I crumpled to the floor while he spoke. The news singed every nerve in my body. Pain radiated up from my stomach across every limb. My scalp tingled. The static grew in my vision. "I need to know," I said. The ranger insisted that the details were unnecessary, but I begged him. What I'm about to tell you is paraphrasing of what the ranger said. Some of this info might change as Denver coroner performs an official autopsy, but this is what we know. The bathroom window of the cabin had been forced open from the outside, but also the front door was unlocked and slightly open when the ranger arrived. The bedroom door was locked from the inside. It appeared that two people, one of them being Nathan, had been staying inside of the cabin for 2 or 3 nights. Nathan's satellite phone was found inside, my number being the last one dialed. It was unclear whether Nathan was present at the cabin when we last spoke, when he promised that he wouldn't go to the cabin. There was a buck knife jammed into one of the walls, and many unusual symbols and words had been carved all over the hallway leading from the living room to the bedroom. They were words in Opi, the language Nathan's people speak, and Zuni, a language they do not. The words haven't yet been translated. There was a carving of a large dream catcher on the outside of the bedroom door, and non-lethal amounts of blood splattered on the carpet and lower wall opposite of the said door. On the inside of the bedroom door, there were small marks everywhere, as though someone had been pounding very hard on it. The ranger and sheriff speculated that Nathan sat on the floor in the hallway for several hours or perhaps the entire day. Someone was in the bedroom, but the door remained locked. It's possible that they had a long conversation. At no point was the electricity or heat functioning in the cabin, because it had been shut off after I was rescued on my second visit. This meant that, however long Nathan stayed, he remained in the dark in the freezing winter each night. 2 pairs of tracks were found leaving the cabin, one from the bedroom window, the other from the front door, heading into the forest out back. The tracks joined together, indicating that the 2 people walked side by side into the snow. Nathan's body was found by the ranger's dogs approximately a quarter mile in, buried upside down with his legs erupting from the soil at the knee. Upon examination, it was discovered that Nathan's face and scalp had been flayed or mutilated. There were deep lacerations in the back that appeared to be from claws and carvings on his arms that looked self-inflicted. The unofficial cause of death, however, was suffocation. He had been buried alive. Oh, and everything in the cellar was gone. It was completely empty. I've never come so close to ending my own life. The guilt and horror I felt at hearing the ranger's words are still ineffable, so I won't bother trying to document them. Somehow I convinced myself that there would be a time for grieving in the future, or even for acts of penitence, but right now I needed to focus on Faye. After all, she might end up like Nathan and T-Way if we don't figure out what to do. A few days passed with no strange activity beyond a voice here and there. I was hesitant to let Faye sleep, to fear that she would dream of her little brother and give the imposter what it sought. But she explained to me her idea, a plan to get rid of the creature for once and for all. And for the first time in months, I actually felt a glimmer of hope. We kept drinking Nathan's tea after concluding that it was doing no despicable harm, and Faye spent the days furiously journaling, and texting with her mom and sister. I called Angela in the Shoshown mood and requested that she come visit us with the hypnosis friend to speak with Faye again, and to bless our new house. I also made as large a donation I could afford to T-Way and Nathan's community to help cover the cost of their funeral ceremonies. In my spare time, in the evenings, I wrote a letter for both of them, and I intend to read it at their place of burial someday. Each night, Faye went to bed crying. She had definitely entered some kind of mourning process, long delayed by years of denial, and now bore witness to the lifelong impact of her loss. Never have I seen a human in so much pain, but Faye assured me that she would be alright, and that I should have faith in her. I silently obliged, because I trust her more than anyone in the world. She knows herself, and I put my faith into that. One night I snuck into the bedroom and retrieved Faye's drawings. She had produced several pictures of her own nightmares, of memories from her childhood, and of a young man that looked like her. I believe he is Christopher. Or at least how Faye imagines he might have looked, had he had survived and grown up. She wrote all kinds of things about the drawing, mostly detailed descriptions of the images, sometimes stories from when she was young, and wrote her brother's name dozens of times. She even drew a family portrait that included herself at age 5 holding the smiling baby. On the 5th night after the incident in the park, Angela and her hypnosis friend arrived. As I've mentioned before, I haven't given the hypnosis a name because I just don't want you to have to keep track of too many people. Faye informed our guest of what she believed we can do to get rid of the entity for good. I went outside and set the drawings under the tree in our front yard, where I'd last seen the shadowy figure. Then we got Faye comfortable and set her up on the couch. Fortunately for us, Faye has the remarkable ability to be able to fall asleep at any time, any place. So, all we had to do was dim the lights in the house. I made a pasta dish for everyone, and within half an hour she was out cold. This time she didn't drink Nathan's tea. For a long time, Angela and the hypnosist and I sat at the kitchen table over coffee and ice cream. We kept our voices low and discussed all of the recent events related to the cabin, waiting for the imposter to show up. The hypnosis was especially interested in the dream catchers and wanted to know who made them. I told her I didn't have any idea, and that at first I thought the entity itself created them. After speaking with you, no sleepers, you are more insightful than I am. I started to believe that someone had summoned or was controlling the entity with the original dreamcatcher. Then, When I broke it, I realized it was protecting me. She said, "Do you think it's possible one of your family members created it? Or the ranger? Do you trust him?" Many people have speculated that T-Way and Nathan were not honest with me, or not who they said they were, but I honestly hadn't considered that the ranger himself could be behind all this. I conceded that it was possible. Faye spoke a few times in her sleep. She laughed and said things like, "Do you need help with that?" And "What the hell are you doing?" After she said the name of her boss, I realized she was just dreaming about work. We waited until midnight, but then no activity had occurred, and no sounds were coming from outside. Angela woke Faye up and said, "We need to take a more direct approach." The two women propped Faye up, hospital bed style, and began to hum a beautiful song. Angela intermittently spoke in her native tongue and traced lines with her fingers across Faye's forehead. The hypnotist occasionally raised her hands in the air and then touched Faye's shoulders. After several minutes, my fiancée went limp. Her head slumped back on the couch, and her arm dangled to the floor. Finally, she opened her eyes, which were now rolled back in her head, and she began breathing rhythmically. The hypnotist said, "Who are you?" She replied, "Faye." "Are you alone?" "I am with you." "Who is here?" "Angela, Felix, Eric, her boss." The hypnotist corrected Faye. She said, "Eric isn't here, it's just four of us." Faye looked puzzled for a moment, then said, "Okay." Angela joined the conversation and touched Faye's arm. She asked, "The one who follows you, the one who calls out to you at night, where is he now? Is he here?" Faye's head craned to the side, like she was emptying water from her ears, then replied, "No." "Where is he?" Faye sat motionless for what felt like a whole minute, and then eventually said, "Across the dark." The hypnotist then said, "Faye, can you call out to him? Can you ask him to come here?" She remained silent. The hypnotist asked again, but this time Faye said forcefully, "No." Angela said, "Honey, we can't get rid of him unless you bring him here." Faye began to whisper. Her mouth trembled, and then she uttered in the voice of a small child, "Please no." Goosebumps rippled across my arms as I sat at the table watching. Angela implored, and Faye began to cry. "You have to call out to him," the hypnotist repeated. "Tell him where you are." Faye slowly rocked her head back and forth and tried to reach up into the air to protect herself, but the weight of the hypnosis state kept her in place. Suddenly her body went stiff and her eyes rolled forward. They landed squarely on me, then looked over my shoulder and focused on something 1,000 miles behind me. Her mouth opened slightly and a gurgling sound came up from her throat. She said in a wet and masculine voice, "Washu, Washu." Faye leaped off the couch and shuddered as though she were trying to throw something off her back. Her body stayed rigid, and she turned and faced away from us. Every joint in her limbs popped with sickening cracks. She bent her head back and stared up at the place where the ceiling met the wall in front of her. Then tightly balled up her fists. She said again, "Washu, Washu, Washu." The hypnotist and Angela were standing now, gathering around Faye to prevent her from hurting herself or dashing off into the night. I played safely a few feet away, trying to be ready for anything. The hypnotist said, "Faye, tell us where he is." She was breathing so hard, and through gritted teeth, forced out the word bedroom. We all turned and looked behind us down the dark hallway. The hypnosis wrapped her hand around Faye's forehead from behind and started whispering in her ear. I turned and quietly moved down the hall towards the bedroom, and as I approached it, I could hear the sliding glass door to the yard open. When I stepped into our bedroom, a cold breeze was blowing into it. The glass door on the opposite wall was wide open. I looked around to make sure I wasn't about to get ambushed, and then approached the door. The backyard light has a motion sensor that automatically activates when something moves. It was off, and the yard was dark. However, at the far end of the yard, I could make out the shape of a man, the same figure I'd seen a week later. The one I'd made the dire mistake of chasing after. This time the figure was even larger than before. It appeared to stand at roughly 7 feet tall. It faced away as always, and its head was cocked towards the moon. Its hands lay pressed against its side, fists balled, tightly clutching my piece of paper. Faye's drawings. It growled, "Roll my, roll my." I slid the door shut as fast as I could and locked it, then raced back into the living room. Faye was now sitting on the couch, head still craned up towards the ceiling, with Angela and the hypnosis speaking to her. They implored her to wake up, but it seemed as though she was struggling to return. Outside, a voice howled. It sounded like a little girl crying out for her mother, and their voice erupted, Laura's, shouting, "Greg, we need to take her to the hospital." Faye began to convulse, so the two women clutched her tightly and began trying to wake her up. An infant began to shriek in the yard, and then it slowly moved down the side of the house to the front door. There was a loud, slow knock, followed by more voices. The knock repeated over and over again, and Becca's voice called out from behind the door. "Faye, where are you? Help me. Please help." At last, Faye sucked in a huge breath and leaned back on the couch. Her head returned to normal position, and she stood up, frantically trying to collect herself. The pounding on the door grew louder, and the voices began to overlap, as though several people were standing in our front yard, crying out into the night. She said breathlessly, "It's here," and looked at me. In Faye's eyes, I saw uncertainty and terror, mirrors of my own state. But then, a look of conviction fell over her face. The fear seemed to evaporate right off. A man began to cry outside the door. It said in Greg's voice, "He's my child too, Laura. My son. Did you think a weekend in the goddamn mountains would make me forget?" Faye gasped. His words were so perfectly clear that I nearly believed he was on the other side of the door. "Don't you fucking dare," Laura's voice shouted. "Just let her forget. Let her forget. This doesn't have to be her burden too." Faye burst into tears and wobbled towards the door. She rested her face against it and reached for the doorknob. The shrieks of a baby echoed through the house, followed by a little girl saying, "What's your name? I can't see you. It's Faye." I watched my fiancé collapse to the floor in despair. Angela and the hypnosis took a step forward, but Faye put her hand in the air to hold them. She sat on the ground, leaned her back against the door, and brushed the strawberry locks out of her face. The door knocked again. My voice followed it by saying, "May I come in? It's freezing out here. Another storm's coming tonight." "I have to tell you something," Faye said, gently knocking on the door. "I know what you want." The voices fell silent all at once, and only an uneven breathing remained. "I had a baby brother. His name was Christopher. He was the number 5. The breathing cut out. Faye knocked on the door again. After a minute, something knocked back. "I remember now," she continued. "I couldn't remember for years, or I guess I didn't want to. It's easier for me to just pretend things never happen. Some kids make things exist. Friends, monsters, places. But I made Christopher not exist. That way I didn't have to lose him. His death was just make-believe. A long, slow, scratching noise responded through the door. The thing outside was dragging a claw across the wood like it was strolling a picture. Faye put her palm on the door, feeling the weak vibrations of the scratching. For a long time, the number was all I could remember. I knew it meant something more, but every time I thought about it, my whole body would hurt. I'd feel sick, and then I'd just fall asleep. Or if I was dreaming, I'd wake up. I always knew it meant something more. The doorknob rattled, and a wet, clunking sound emitted from it. The imposter was gnawing on it from the other side. The clatter of 100 jagged teeth rose in vile symphony across our living room. He was stillborn. Do you know what that is? He died inside my mom. All this time I've avoided burying Christopher, but you finally helped me realize why it's time I laid him to rest. Faye, can I come in? Becca's voice called out. I don't get it. He falls asleep so fast when you've got him. You want her to be your new mommy, Caleb? The scratchy noises persisted. Faye wiped tears from her eyes and took a deep breath. Now you know everything. I wanted you to know. A chorus of voices rang out in the night. An infant screamed, a toddler cried. Greg and Lawyer and Becca and T-Way and Nathan and the ranger all spoke at once. Decades of pain washed through the door. Words of anguish and sorrowful cries drowned out all other sounds in the room. Angela, the hypnosist, and I exchanged terrified glances, but Faye remained motionless at the door, staring up into my eyes. She didn't blink. The knocking on the door swelled to violent pounding. The entity used every possible trick it could. It tried to hit her right where the wounds were fresh and tried to tear open the oldest scars. But Faye never budged. She held her ground emotionally and never took her eyes off me. They were filled with a knowing calm, as if to say enough. When the imposter got no response, it stomped from the front door to the nearby window. It towered over us and blocked out the moonlight that lit up from the drapes. A huge shadow fell across Faye as she sat there unmoved. "Oh my," he growled. Faye's lips quivered, but she said nothing. A titanic scream erupted from the creature, and it slapped the glass with an open hand. The sound shook our home and struck a lightning bolt of terror in the pit of my stomach, but Faye did not react. She didn't even flinch. Then the entity said something I did not expect. Instead of assuming the voice of someone we knew, it spoke in several I did not recognize. It spoke only one labored sentence, but each word was uttered with a different tongue. I walked 1,000 years across the dark to find you. A small part of me wanted to run away screaming, but I was so afraid my legs wouldn't even move. The finality, the longing of what it said was incomprehensibly dreary. I totally lost my nerves. That moment, another thing even less expected happened. The shadow receded from the window, coloring Faye's face silver with a dim kiss of the moonlight. Sullen footsteps lurched across our yard and vanished into the backdrop of cricket sounds. After a while, we were all alone. All three of us looked down at Faye. A relieved smile spread across her face. She wasn't crying anymore. It's been several days since the imposter left. It returned once only to sing a Morris lullaby. Soul me, I do. I'm a naked soul. Me, I do. Faye slept through it entirely. I didn't mention it to her. My fiancée has been sleeping well since that night. She hasn't slept talked and certainly hasn't slept walked. In fact, she hasn't even really been tossing and turning like she normally does. It's as if a dreadful weight was lifted from her shoulders during the days she's cried. She cuddles with me and talks about her child. She Skypes with her mom and sister. They cry too. I have shed many tears with her and for her loss, but I understand now what she did. Faye never dreamt of Christopher, only the number 5. As a child, she repressed the memory and pain of his death and thus forgot about him. That number became the lockbox in which he was hidden. It was the coffin she buried him in. And she buried him so deep within herself she couldn't even remember him in her nightmares. That is why the entity never fully understood what she was hiding, and that is why it never gained full access to her. Faye's lifelong sleep disturbances was her mind's attempts at keeping that welling pain repressed. But by her talking in her sleep, she invited dark attention to herself. If you speak long enough into void, someone is bound to start listening. Someone or something heard Faye's pain and saw it as a weakness. It saw those cracks in her heart as a passage into her soul. And so it chose her. The imposter became transfixed with my fiancé, not because she was an easy target, but because she was a monolithic puzzle box of torment, a challenge, a worthy opponent. I remarked early on in these stories that one of the things I love most about Faye is her intelligence. She has an artistic creativity that allows her to see things in ways I do not. She realized that the imposter knew it could tug on her like puppet, but delving into the darkest parts of her mind and all those hidden places were weapons to use against her, to weaken her, to wear her down. But instead of burying her secrets deeper, she unearthed them and brought them into the light. By moving Christopher and the number that represents him from her subconscious into her working thoughts, Faye unleashed a tidal wave of forgotten pain upon herself. But she also took away the imposter's power over her. She cut off her own puppet strings, and now there was nothing left for the creature to grab onto. And so it left. I've also shed tears for my dear friends Thankyou and Nathan. Perhaps I never convey the warmth of their personalities and sincerities of their hearts, but I trusted them entirely, and do not believe they had anything to do with this foul thing that stalked my fiancé for all these years. Their deaths are mortal wounds on my heart, and I will always carry the agony of their loss. I want it to hurt. As a permanent reminder, they have given so much to me and asked nothing in return. Only that I preserve the goodness of their people in my memory. By writing about their altruism and sacrifices, I am trying to fulfill that promise. Maybe their spirits live on in the sacred land they protected. We may never know for sure who built the dream catcher at the cabin, or the one in the trees outside my old home. Right now, I believe that they were built by different people who live on Pikes Peak. Some of them wanted to protect fools like me who venture on that mountain without understanding its significance to the Indians living there. Others, perhaps, wish to harm them. Maybe even Angela herself built one for us. Maybe you can't tell the person they're designed to protect, or else it doesn't work.
Faye's ring has also been the topic of heated debate. Whether or not it is cursed, what should be done with it, etc. For now, my fiancé does not wish to be a part of it. But she might consider it if anything happens again. It is still a precious family heirloom and a symbol of my devotion, whatever taint it may carry. I guess what I mean is, we still don't have all the answers. And the unfortunate thing is that we may never. The true nature of the entity and a full explanation of what happened to us might remain a mystery. But in time, I believe I will come to understand more about this terrible ordeal. We plan to head back to Colorado in a few weeks to spend time with Faye's parents, to pay our deepest respects to T-Way and Nathan's community, and to witness the bold dosing of the cabin. Whatever secrets it still hides, let them be buried deep beneath the rubble and the snow of decades to come.